Join us on our website at www.thegrandview.org and get more information about our show. There you can download our free book, Everything You Need to Know About Outdoor Painting. I have a lot of people that sit and they listen to my YouTube videos over and over and over again, and I marvel at how people can have that kind of patience to listen to me over and over and over again.
They love me.
Good.
I love it too, but I don't have time.
Well, you could put them on your car while you're driving around. You could listen to me, because I'm not painting, so you don't have to like. In fact, I got somebody this week, and usually my reviews on YouTube are really good. The people who really want to learn something really go through all of the videos, and I have people that have literally said that I'm their second husband. And it was said by their husband, because they literally, all he hears while they're sitting there painting and before they go to bed is my voice.
I heard that again.
It's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, when I had the television show, everybody would go, oh my God, it's like, you know, I listen to your show and fall asleep every night, you know, so, because it's on at night on PBS. So, you know, the thing is, it's extraordinary what you guys do, even for the homework assignments, to contribute to this class. And it's that contribution, actually, where you're sitting there painting, where you learn. And this format works. Now, I could sit up here and demonstrate, and there are a lot of people on YouTube that demonstrate. And just like Ken said, he watches all these videos, but he's not learning anything. Because very few of those actual how-to painting demonstrations aren't telling you temperatures. They're not saying why compositions work and what doesn't, where a central focal point is. They're just sitting there painting. And a lot of even the professional artists, a lot of it is by gosh, by golly, and intuition. So when you're watching somebody paint live, they're trying to explain, well, you know, this is what I'm doing and trying to do that. But you don't know what they're thinking. You don't know the nuts and bolts that's in their head. And a lot of those artists are just looking at something going, well, it feels like it should be more blue, so they put more blue in. And when you ask one of these artists, and I've seen this at the plein air convention, somebody will say, so what did you do over there on that painting? Because they watch them do it. And you'll see the artist kind of bewildered. And they have to recreate it because they worked on impulse and they don't quite have the answer for that. So it's a lot of art is created that way. In fact, a lot of even abstract art, a lot of things are just intuitions. And that's great, but the issue is without having strong knowledge of fundamentals, intuition doesn't work. Because you can have an intuition and you want to put a highlight somewhere, and if you don't know how to create a highlight, it's not going to happen. So I have students that I coach that are just amazed with just a little bit of information, how it transforms their painting instantly. And they literally go, and I promise this, when they sign up for my coaching, I said, the day we start coaching, you will never paint the same way again, ever. It's that complete changeover. And what I teach in this class is those basic fundamentals. No, I don't demonstrate for you because I think it's a waste of time. If you want to see me paint, you could watch me on PBS. You could buy a DVD from me. And there are some snips of me painting on YouTube that you can sit and watch. I know when I produced the television show that I didn't quite have the grasp that I have now. So when I'm talking about painting from intuition and painting things right, as opposed to controlling what's happening and being in charge and causing things to happen. That's a different mindset altogether, and that's kind of what I teach in my classes, is that. So it's a little different thing. So in this class, I request something, and then I anticipate to see what comes. And a lot of the things that I've learned have come out of my request. So if I request that you go home and paint stuff out of the refrigerator, which is what I'm asking, it's interesting the work that I get back. It's interesting that when I request something from the refrigerator, how they will actually like try to put together like a still life that is very comparable to one thing. You know, they're still thinking, oh, if I'm going to get something out of the refrigerator, I have to have lettuce, tomatoes, and onions, because those three things actually work together. You know. But in essence, artistically, we could have chosen a bottle of French's mustard, because it's an awesome color. We could have got a bar of butter, because it's an interesting shape. And we could have gotten a jar or something, God knows what you could find in there. But instead of looking for complementary things to tell this kind of sweet story, it's actually more interesting if you really had things that didn't go together at all. Because when we're painting, it doesn't matter what the things are, if they're painted well. And they're not things. We don't paint things. So if you do a head of lettuce and you put a jar of mustard next to it, those two have nothing in common in our world. But through the effects of lights and shadows, color, form, composition, those two things become like one. And the viewer isn't concerned at that point that you would never use those two things as a recipe. And almost all the homework assignment that I got, they were trying to find the harmonic in it. It's kind of like one world, one color kind of thing. God forbid if we have diversity. So as artists, what I want you to do is, if I give you a homework assignment, I want you to just sit there and go, okay, I'm going to go out of my comfort zone. I'm going to take things that don't make sense. I'm going to put them together, and through my use of lights and colors and composition, I'm going to create a whole where the viewer is going to be so fascinated with what I've created that it won't matter that they don't make an interesting meal, because it's not about that. Every homework assignment that I give you guys, I have no anticipation of the outcome. And oftentimes I sway my conversations on what actually occurs. Like this whole conversation occurred because I noticed everybody that kind of produced stuff had stuff that was relatively in common. So, and I have, a lot of times my homework assignments are the uncommon. So I will have like bubble wrap, you know? And some of my most interesting paintings that were done with a class was bubble wrap. Chicken wire. What are you supposed to do with chicken? It's so uncommon that you can't really put it to anything. You have to kind of create something on its own. And so what I'm interested in is lighting, shadowing, cast shadows, temperatures, transitions, all of these other things. So I purposely try to make it difficult for you to put things together. The reason why I even bring up requests is that if I just say, go home and paint a painting, you guys will be spending the whole week running around your house looking for something that you want to paint. So that's one reason why I isolate it. In my Power to Create class, I go home and paint something that you can find in your bathroom. Remember that? And so what a lot of them did was a roll of toilet paper. Do you know how interesting a roll of toilet paper painted with lights and shadows can be? I mean, it's really a fabulous thing. You can roll it, you can create compositions with it. I mean, shoot, if you watch movies, they actually make bridal gowns out of it, you know? So there's a lot of diversity. And what's interesting as a painting is how it's shaped and how it's formed. And that's, you know, and then how for artists, we don't really care about the shape or form. We care about how light and shadow fall on it. Because for us artists, it's not about things at all. It's about how light hits things and causes shadows. The key to painting is to get your still life up and move your lighting around till something happens that's more interesting. More interesting than the thing you're painting. And so having a mustard container throw a cast shadow across the head of a lettuce could be a very interesting effect. Not what the things are. If you're concerned with putting them all together, you're painting a thing painting, and we don't paint things. Spend more time, and I actually want you to try to paint what you see as a practicing, along with this next homework assignment that we're going to do. Okay? Just because I want you to kind of get used to just painting. And the key to this, too, is you want to paint what you see. So if you want to change the background, you have to change it in your model, not on your painting. You literally have to paint what you see. And I told you earlier, if you paint what you see, you don't need me anymore. Well, you do, because there's so much more. But that covers almost everything about painting. Yeah. But see, here again, too, you know, you have fruit. And then, see the size here? You see the size here?
Yeah.
See this here? It's like a lot of redundant shapes. And when you're putting together a composition, you want to try to have a cylinder, a square, a box, a rectangle, a thing. You want to try to make every shape. What's interesting is that even the bottle that you chose is almost the same mass and shape as your apples, with a little twist, but it's kind of the same thing. So we end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 masses that are about this big around. And so it doesn't make for an interesting composition with all the stuff that you have to choose from in your refrigerator. Well, you know, when I go out and paint the Grand Canyon, and I've got a little 8x10, you should never paint anything bigger than life size. So if these are all, you know, if you're painting a mustard container and if you got it at Costco, it's this big, then you can paint it actual size, and it could be just the base of it going out, which is kind of what we were talking about, having the objects hit all 3 sides of the canvas. So that would have been an interesting big block of yellow in there. But again, we're not painting mustard, we're using that shape and that color to cast shadows or highlights on. And then you could have put in a stick of butter. One of these, cutting a section out. You know, I'm not only teaching you to paint, I'm teaching you to think creative. I'm teaching you to think out of the box. It's like when I went, and I tell this story, when I went to college and our end thing was to do a self-portrait. And so I sat in the mirror and just did a self-portrait. And here I'm in this college of all these artists, the Academy of Art. And I look at everybody's portfolios, and these guys are geniuses. I mean, because they all kind of I grew up in Lake Tahoe. I never really even knew what a portfolio was. And never saw paintings up there. You know, I had the casinos to look at. So consequently, I immediately got, wow, I'm not really thinking outside of my comfort zone. And I ended up with a portrait, and they did all these awesome things with people looking in mirrors and things dark, coming at the light. I was like, really. So what I'm trying to do, along with how we're teaching other things, is to stimulate some creativity. You know, throw something in there. I mean, even a piece of saran wrap around a few of these items would have been a kind of an interesting flair. Again, composition is based on shape and abstract. When you reproduce a shape over and over and over again, it tends to be kind of boring. And then again, too, is how it's lit. So I'm really aware of these shapes and forms and the objects they are because you haven't taken my mind off of it. Here again, too, we don't have enough shadow in it to create some interest, to get the highlight through, and where people go, wow, look at the cast shadow of that orange on the jar, and then you could have had the foreground dark and you could have played with it. Just kind of like what we do with our lighting all the time. Yeah, well, but if we're lighting this, it really won't make. But see, if we bring the light onto the pear and we bring that stuff into more of a shadow, it ends up being just a little bit more, you know how we were trying to get distance in the painting? Just by taking all the color off the back of that, we're getting much more depth into the painting, and now it becomes much more interesting. And the way that this is lit, all of a sudden we're much more aware of a lighting effect, which kind of distracts us from all of the consistent shapes. So what were you thinking?
Trying to think of all the rules about setting up something with different shapes, having shadows, interesting shadows, having things go out to the edges of the canvas. And since my objects didn't go out to the edge except for the broccoli, then I tried to bring shadows toward the edge and the material underneath toward the edges.
So you have the materials coming to the edge, but that's, so like the broccoli, you're taking my homework assignment from college literally. Remember in college, we spent a whole semester drawing broccoli? Big sheets of broccoli, big spears. I mean, talk about not painting anything bigger than life size. I mean, these big things of broccoli.
Isn't the color of
It's, yeah. But again, we're kind of concentrating on shade, on things. Is it? Yeah, it is pretty. She does it real well. But see how that, it's like, oh my God, gotta get to the edge.
The frame's going to cover that.
Yeah.
It'll be on the edge when it
But it feels like it's just kind of like safe, like it just fits in, just barely. And that's things you don't want in a painting. If it's going to go heading, if you're putting a tree in and it's heading towards the top of the painting, you got to take that sucker all the way out. You can't have this little halo around the top of sky going through trying to keep it in. And remember, I like things that originate from inside the painting going out. That's fine. But you can have things from the outside of the painting come in. So you don't want to have just this spindly little piece of yarn hanging off of it coming this way. But you could have a piece of yarn that kind of ropes in here and then slides off, but we can see the bottom. So you can have something that starts in and goes out. Like this starts in. At this point, you just had to push it all the way out. This here, you know, I don't know. You know, people are familiar with Photoshop. And the first thing you do with Photoshop is crop. And even your phones have crop. I mean, they don't have many things on your phones to fix your paintings. Well, the new ones do, but that cropping tool is like a godsend. When I do the YouTube videos, first thing I do is crop, crop, crop. Here we have the bottle. And I don't know if that necessarily, but we could have had the bottle cropped down. See? And compositionally, that's more interesting than having all that up there. Because what we do here is that we're really focusing on shape. And this becomes a shape. This is a shape. This is a shape. That's a shape. And abstract-wise, I would love to have seen something kind of break this shape up that comes down here. So that's a closed-in shape, that's a closed-in shape, and every one of these shapes should be different than one another. When we have it open like this becomes one big shape. And it's like this big hat that sits on top of the painting. And it's okay too. This is the way most still lifes have been done up until the 1880s. They would set it up very traditionally. Darla wants to start a new painting that's a traditional Dutch still life, that everything is just there. Painted extraordinary, but it's not challenging. More contemporary still lifes, they go out at the surface. They crop their painting down so that each one of these becomes an abstract shape or form. When you highlight an object like this, it starts to become about the thing. Now, if you notice when I cropped it, it was more interesting as shapes. We were talking about rectangles and squares and things as opposed to a bottle. And so that kind of gives it that. And then you have a few echoing. See these lines in here? That's echoing the same shape as the bottle. So I would have done some other brush strokes in here. In fact, you're getting kind of really soft with your blending. And I'd like to see you add more paint and then create brush strokes. Because one thing that we're painters. Our role in life is not to duplicate photography, but actually bring music to it. So photographers do what they do, and then we take it into our hands and we create paintings out of it. And we want the paintings not to duplicate the photograph, but to actually feel like they're painting. And so part of that is like listening to music. You can hear a piano player hit a note. And at that moment, he could choose to play that note however they want to. It could be soft, it could be hard, it could be staccato, it could hold it. And in reference to what the other notes are doing, it works in what they're playing. And it's these millions of the decisions that a musician has when they are playing music. Should I hit this next note a little softer or louder than the next note? If you've never played music, you don't know what that feeling's like, but when you're playing music and you're really creating music on the spot, even though you're copying somebody else's song, like Liberace. When you listen to Liberace's music, there's nobody that ever played like him. He brought something to it that just could never be duplicated because he added his thing to his song. So he'd do Moon River, but he would add his thing, and it's that pause thing that made his music human and specific to him. And so how he hit the notes and played the notes was part of the overall creation. When we think about painting, every brush stroke, you have an opportunity to think about it. So I see a lot of people mindlessly painting and talking and, worrying about a breakdown of some kind. And yet, when you're really sitting painting, it's really like a stroke. And at that point with that stroke, you have an option to elongate that stroke or shorten it, add more paint. You have a choice to bring it horizontal or vertical. Not just fill in the space, but the application of the paint becomes part of the art. They call it like the calligraphy. And how you pull a brush stroke off, even if you're doing a background. How you work horizontal and vertical strokes. That's the art. I mean, that's why we love watching Van Gogh's paintings. And I said, watch them instead of view them, is because we watch him painting. We can almost feel his intense view of what he's painting. That's what makes him so great. People go, he paints like a child. Why do people like his work? And they like it because they can almost feel it being created. Why do people love jazz? Because they love being there when the person who's playing it is actually part of it. And we don't know from note to note what he's going to take us. The unpredictability of that. And you have that with painting. And so what I'd love you to do is to start experimenting with that. The brush strokes. Try to go different directions and more paint. And try to think about every brush stroke. Instead of just painting something in, actually use your brush as a means of communicating to the viewer how you actually made the decision to paint. Think about, and then try not to duplicate a brush stroke twice. One long brush stroke, two short ones. One up, one down. A diagonal one. When that drops to the front.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying to do that type of painting on the shadows rather
Everything.
than blending.
Yeah, rather than blending, that's a good place to start. But then you can start doing that with all of this stuff. I mean, this is really good, but what if, you painted it, and you actually got paint in that area that's three-dimensional, luscious. That's kind of difficult. Now, like what we talked about last week, is that artists do that, like Richard Schmidt and Sargent. They would paint a big piece, and then they take those little mats that are a little bit, and they'll like scale it down, and then they'll crop the painting. It's not uncommon. And then a framer will go in and they'll take the canvas off the board and restretch it. Richard Schmidt doesn't even put canvas wood behind his thing. He takes a big sheet of canvas, tapes it onto a piece of cardboard, and then he paints. And then when it's all dry, he takes two mat boards that are cut, and he goes down and says, okay, this is where I like it. And he can move the golden mean, he can kind of adjust it, and then he will put a line around it, and then the framer will just take that and frame it. But like with Richard Schmidt, it's like, you know, if you want your painting to have energy, you have to kind of start with energy at the beginning. And so when you start, it's like usually a lot of you are like there carefully drawing, you know, erasing, drawing and stuff. If you watch somebody who knows how to paint and manipulate things, what they do is they kind of take a big brush and they go, and that very first scribble is done intentionally so it has movement. It's not like this, and it's not like this. They will go zigzag, boom, bang, bang. And you see the hesitation. I know when I do that, I'm like looking at the painting and I'm like Zorro, and I just want to know where I'm going to make the next mark across my canvas, because that's going to stay there. And then I'll like start scribbling some things down where I want the objects. And then I start painting on top of that chaos. And your painting starts to look a little bit fresher, a little bit more chaotic. And on top of that, you can start putting brush strokes. It's really hard on a flat surface to be inspired to put brush strokes in. It's much more easier to do that if you've broken the surface up into some energy, and then try to keep that energy. So my advice is the next thing that you paint, set up your still life, put one hand behind your back. I don't know why, but that's just kind of like, it just looks good. You can dress like Zorro like I do. And get your brush and go at the very end and kind of hold it loosely and start attacking your canvas. And then just kind of start putting some brush strokes in where the objects are instead of tracing. Throw some of that in. And you'll have kind of this thing going. And then look at that thing and say, okay, I'm going to paint the background, but I'm going to play off of what I've got here. I'm going to add more paint and I'm going to put more in. I mean, almost everybody who calls me for coaching, the first thing they do is they say, well, I want to loosen my painting up. Most of them can paint really well, but they're really tight. And you're that way too. And we marvel at people who paint like that. But it just doesn't happen. You kind of have to like will it and be not so intimidated by it, and know that you have enough knowledge to fix it. And for you right now, that's your next step. Because I can put anything in front of you and you paint it really well. Your next step is to start making music through brushstrokes. Gonna play with me on that? Okay.
One question, is it helpful or a crutch if you use one of those little gray things that you can adjust when you're out somewhere to help you find what you want to paint, your composition, and set your still life up and then use this little thing to frame it and move your frame around?
Oh, that just, I go a lot of times out, like even at the plein air convention, and the first thing everybody pulls up is this little tiny plastic. And I think it's an okay idea. I mean, I don't think you need it. You could just look through your camera. Nowadays, what's really kind of cool, if you want to go that way, because, I mean, you know, if Mozart were alive writing music, what do you think he would be writing music for? Probably soundtracks for movies, because he liked that. So, and he'd probably be working on a synthesizer because that's available to him. And he'd probably be working with a lot of the that noise that it makes, because he's an artist, he's trying to communicate. So it's not a bad thing to go take your cell phone, snap a picture of what you want to paint out there, and then look at it, because it's the same kind of tool like that square is. Look at it, and then you can kind of crop it, like we were talking about here. In fact, there's a crop tool on your phone, and you punch it, and you can just crop your photo down, and then when you got a pleasing section, you can kind of look at it. And now I'm not telling you to sit outdoors and go paint outdoors from your camera, because then you could just take a picture and come in.
I'm not sitting up here still like home though. You know.
Well, same thing. Same thing is that you could just take a picture of it and crop it and find out what you want to do with it. And you can see, okay, is it better out of the picture or not? You know, should I crop it? So it's a really good tool to use to see, is it this painting better cropped or not? And it's hard to sit and guess at it and make decisions and find out at the end that you should have cropped it. So take a picture of it, play with it, and once you see it, then go ahead and start painting it that way. But don't use your camera, because then that whole thing defeats the purpose. That's better than sitting there with this little tool out here, but a lot of artists use it. But it's like, you should be able to look at your canvas and say, okay, I'm looking over there, and there's my central focal point. That's what I want to do. And then you can kind of see how the masses will work around that. And you're not painting exactly what's there, you're interpreting what's there. What's out there is going to be changing constantly, and if you try to chase it, that little thing that you're holding up is just a waste of time. You know, because a few minutes you put it out there, and what you just saw that you thought was a good idea isn't anymore. So it's not that. But the camera's a really good tool to use that. Yeah?
Along the same lines, what do you think of thumbnail sketches?
Thumbnail sketches are excellent, because they kind of do the same thing as the camera does, and then you can crop, do a little drawing. And I mean, when we're talking thumbnail, it's like little 1 inch by 2 inches, not anything. But you can crop it to masses, and you could see, okay, is this better as a composition with things? And especially if you're trying to paint big things into small spaces, like at the Grand Canyon, you almost have to do a thumbnail sketch in it just to tell your brain, hey, you need to shrink this down if you want a foreground, middle ground, background. And so the thumbnail sketch will allow you to shrink it down, put in a foreground, put in the mountain, and see how small you have to go. So you have an idea. And then if you start painting it, you have that. But you shouldn't spend more than a few minutes doing it, and just kind of see the proper sizes, and then mass. And it's a good way to put footnotes in too, of how you want to work the highlights. In painting, we simplify things to chunks. And when you're doing a little thumbnail sketch, because it's so small, you only really pay attention to the chunks. And so it helps you kind of get a value situation, and then you can look at it as an abstract. So there's a lot of value in the thumbnail sketches, but you don't want to spend more than a few minutes doing them. You have to be kind of quick to analyze that. So this week's homework assignment. Join us on our website at www.thegrandview.org and get more information about our show. There you can download our free book, Everything You Need to Know About Outdoor Painting.